You may have been told that you act like one of your parents, similar mannerisms, voice, or attitude, but what if your parent was incarcerated for robbery? Does that mean that you'll go on to commit robbery as well? If so, does that mean that you carry a gene that causes you to commit the crime? These are some of the questions that behavioral genetics tries to answer regarding the criminal justice system. Now, behavioral genetics is the idea that a person's genetics could influence their behavior. This is useful in the criminal justice system in determining the guilt in a trial. It can be used as a defense, or in the sentencing phase to decide whether this person will go on to commit a crime again. So far, there have been 3 different big waves in behavioral genetics, and it started in the 1970s with the XYY chromosomal defect. This was introduced as a defense to begin with. The defect consists of a male having an extra Y chromosome, which just causes abnormal tallness and different behavioral issues and mental and cognitive defects. And a study was done that found that there was an overrepresentation of men with this defect in the prison that they studied, and that led to the conclusion that XYY individuals are more likely to show antisocial behavior, meaning that they're more likely to go against society and commit crimes. This defense led to at least one man being acquitted by reason of insanity, and a change in a lot of the state courts where they decided to consider a genetic defense with the stipulation that there was a very high degree of medical certainty linking the defect to insanity or interference of cognitive capacity. So that basically means that if an expert witness can concretely prove that there is a pretty certain link to between insanity and the defect, or interference of cognitive capacity and the defect, then the court would consider the defense. That doesn't mean that they would find the person not guilty. It means that they would allow that defense to be used in the trial. And again, only one man was acquitted by the XYY defense. The next wave of behavioral genetics in the criminal justice system was Huntington's disease, which is a genetic disease where as you age, your neurons degenerate and cognitive capacity, motor skills, all of those functions deteriorate. Now, Huntington's disease as a defense has led to one individual being acquitted by reason of insanity and another found guilty but mentally ill and later not guilty by reason of insanity on appeal when their symptoms started. Now, most recently, we see the MAOA genotype, which is, MAOA stands for monoamine oxidase, which is something in the brain that regulates neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. And low levels of MAOA allow these neurotransmitters to accumulate, and that accumulation causes aggressive and antisocial behavior. Now, the studies done on this were solely white men. I believe they tested other races, but only men. They only tested men, and they only found this linkage in white males, so it does not affect any race other than white males, which is also interesting and gives implications of race in behavioral genetics, which I don't know, it's something that could be looked into. But this study found that in white males, when this genotype is present, and they suffered substantial childhood abuse and they were provoked in some way, aggressiveness and criminality rates increased. Now, you heard all the stipulations. They have this MAOA genotype defect, they suffered childhood abuse, and they were provoked. That's not just the genetic defect that caused any of this. It was also how they grew up, childhood experiences, and the situation that they were put in. All of that together is what increased aggressiveness and criminality, not specifically the MAOA genotype. Now, these limitations further prove that behavioral genotyping is not to be heavily relied on in predicting behavior. However, there are cases, very few cases, that did consider this genotype as a defense. However, most of the times that it worked or even was considered at all was because the expert witness also linked it to substantial childhood abuse. There has only been one case where the MAOA genotype was admissible as a defense in the guilt phase of a trial. The guilt phase is just when the jury is deciding whether the accused is guilty or not guilty. This case was State v. Waldrop. The defense called a forensic psychiatrist to the stand who stated that the accused has the genotype and experienced childhood trauma, which together created a causal factor in the crime. The forensic psychiatrist recognized the link between the genotype and the childhood trauma rather than just the genotype specifically. The accused was not acquitted, but his charge was brought down to lesser crimes than the prosecution originally tried him for. And the jury based this decision on the conclusion that the accused knowingly and intentionally committed the crime. However, it occurred in a state of passion and provocation that led the accused to act irrationally. There were 4 cases that allowed an MAOA defense in the sentencing phase. The sentencing phase is just when the person has already been determined guilty and their punishment is being determined by the judge. Now, only one of these cases, State v. Barraza, cites a lower sentence because of the MAOA defense. In this case, the defense called an expert witness who stated that the accused had the MAOA genotype and experienced significant sexual abuse as a child, which together led to his aggressive behavior. This was the basis for the defense's main argument, which was that because of his genetic vulnerability, the accused should not be eligible for the death penalty, which basically, you see this a lot in defendants who have a disability. So it's interesting to see that this genotype is somewhat being treated as a disability, and I feel like that has a lot of broader implications. This man was sentenced to life without parole. So basically, their argument worked, and he did not get the death penalty. The MAOA genotype has been effective as a defense during the appellate phase twice. The appellate phase it doesn't happen in every case, but a person has been sentenced and they started serving their sentence and they feel that their trial went unfairly in some way for some reason, and they can file an appeal, and if that's accepted, they can go to appellate court to maybe get a sentence reduction. Now, these 2 cases where MAOA was effective, neither of them fit the stipulations of the MAOA studies, but they both received sentence reductions anyway. One defendant cited a recent move to a country as an environmental stressor that mixed with his MAOA genotype to cause his behavior. This obviously, a move to another country is not childhood trauma, it's not a state of provocation, it's nothing that was cited in the studies. He received a 1-year sentence reduction. So not too much, but enough. The other case was even more far off, as the accused was a woman and cited no environmental stressor but provided brain imaging that showed very minor abnormalities of unknown significance. This, coupled with her psychiatric evaluation, led the court to deem her mentally unfit at the time of her crimes, and her sentence was reduced by 10 years. Now again, the MAOA studies were only found to affect white men, not women. And again, it had to cite childhood trauma, but there was no environmental stressor at all with this woman. So this is just based off of genetics, I guess, which again, completely not true. And to have her sentence reduced by 10 years without fitting the stipulations of this study is crazy to me. But it is Italy, not US, so it might not be as relevant, but it could still suggest a trend or set a precedent for it to occur in more places. So now that we've talked a little bit about how behavioral genetics is used in the criminal justice system and what it is, let's discuss some implications. There could be definitely a lot of negative implications if this increases in popularity and admissibility. Right now, it doesn't seem to be super popular, it doesn't seem to be super admissible, so it's not necessarily a problem right now, but in the future it definitely could be. This could create a rise in genetic determinism, which is the idea that genes alone can cause behavior, and this takes the blame and accountability from the person committing the crime. So to me, if that's what our justice system is based on, genetic determinism, if that's why people are committing crimes, then that would just blow up the entire criminal justice system, because why do we need prison? Why do we need court if it's not the person's fault that they're committing a crime? So it's very weird. And if there's a direct proven link between a specific gene and criminal behavior, would there be a preventative detention system where an individual is deemed a danger to themselves or others? And will we jail people for just having a specific gene? That feels unethical. Again, individual rights infringements. Will we surveil people with a specific gene? How and when will people be tested? Will it be mandated at birth or like a requirement in school that's similar to vaccines? Will people be forced into treatment when it's found out that they have the gene? Like, so many different things. Will it be necessary to inform people of a person's crime-causing gene? Like the sex offender list. Like if your neighbor has this genetic defect that could make them commit a crime, will they be expected to share that with you? That kind of goes against all of the individual rights that we have developed in America. Then there's also the idea of euthanasia and selective genotyping and eugenics. Like, will people with the gene be pushed or even offered physician-assisted suicide to keep them from committing crimes? Will people choose their partners based on their genes? In IVF, will zygotes with the gene be considered viable still, or will they be terminated? All these different things. It's super interesting to see, to think about all the things that could go wrong. Now, what really stuck out to me when thinking about behavioral genetics is the labeling theory, which is a popular criminological theory. It's the idea that if a person is assigned a label, they're very likely to become that label. This is used a lot in juvenile court, and it's also used to explain why people continue to commit crimes throughout their life. So it's like this person gets charged with a minor crime, but now they're labeled a criminal, and everybody thinks they're a criminal. So instead of being better, they're going to succumb to that label. Now, behavioral genotyping would label someone as a criminal simply for their genetic makeup, something that they cannot control. That could have very detrimental mental health effects on people. Could you imagine you find out that you have this gene that could commit a crime, and then all of a sudden you're outcasted? You're expected to be a criminal. And that could make criminals out of people who wouldn't otherwise be criminals, because they feel that no matter what, they're going to become a criminal. Might as well be one now. But hopefully the world never comes to this. Hopefully behavioral genotyping stays the way it should be, as a super interesting research, but not something used in court. I think it's purely unethical and simply untrue to blame a person's actions on their genes. So even if more testing leads to the conclusion of a gene-causing behavior, it shouldn't have much effect on the criminal justice system or the way that we treat certain behaviors in society. Now, I think behavioral genetics is super interesting, so I would really be interested in more testing. I think there should be more testing. But like I said, it shouldn't have an effect on the criminal justice system. That concludes my podcast. Thank you for listening, and I hope to hear your thoughts on the topic.